Speaker Mike Johnson assumed he could bypass the Constitution without facing any resistance, obstructing a legitimately elected Congresswoman from assuming her office for 36 days. This unprecedented holdup marked the most extensive postponement in contemporary times, stripping hundreds of thousands of Arizona citizens of their rightful legislative voice. He orchestrated this disenfranchisement to safeguard partisan advantages and conceal troubling ties to the controversial Epstein documents. Consequently, Representative Jasmine Crockett confronted him during a legislative inquiry while holding a dossier labeled as constitutional breaches regarding his leadership. The ensuing 49 minutes compelled conservative lawmakers to turn against their leader, prompted 3 legal experts to denounce him on live television, and sparked an urgent judicial mandate. This inexplicable double standard allowed 2 conservative politicians to take their oaths within a single day while intentionally sidelining a liberal lawmaker for over a month. He found himself entirely unable to justify the underlying motives regarding those sensitive investigative records. A grieving mother from the Southwest provided devastating testimony regarding her child passing away without vital federal advocacy. A deafening 18-second pause followed the piercing inquiry asking exactly why her specific legislative voice terrified him so much. A federal magistrate observed the proceedings broadcasted live as progressive legislators simultaneously marched out in a unified display of defiance. A renowned legal scholar stated clearly on the broadcast that such incremental suppression of voting rights is exactly how republics collapse. In this manner, an African-American legislator from Texas championed a Hispanic colleague's entitlement to govern, while unmasking a leader willing to shatter democratic norms to shield influential figures. The atmosphere inside the Judiciary Panel chamber carried an unmistakably heavy tension that specific morning. The traditionally vacant public viewing areas were completely filled with journalists positioned closely together alongside traveling constituents and prominent academics who cleared their itineraries. 24 broadcasting lenses from every major television network indicated this was never intended to be an ordinary administrative review. Urgent procedural inquiries seldom attracted such intense public scrutiny, yet this particular gathering carried exceptional weight. Committee leader Jim Jordan gripped his wooden mallet while displaying an uncharacteristic level of visible discomfort. He usually operated as the aggressive interrogator who relished asking combative questions to make his political opponents squirm. On this occasion, he was managing an inquiry guaranteed to inflict severe political damage upon his own conservative faction. He demanded order in the packed room as the sharp sound of his mallet reverberated off the walls. He announced they were convening an urgent session regarding the legal protocols for swearing in special election victors. He stressed that this administrative issue required the utmost gravity and professional consideration from everyone present. He was clearly attempting a defensive strategy to diffuse the escalating tension before the confrontation inevitably erupted. This transparent attempt at managing the room's volatile energy was destined to fail miserably. He outlined the roster of individuals scheduled to provide their perspectives during the highly anticipated hearing. The list included the Speaker of the House, the sidelined politician Adelita Grijalva, and multiple recognized authorities on legislative operations. Over 20 million citizens tuned in live as major networks preempted their standard broadcast to cover the unfolding drama. Every media outlet provided continuous coverage because the entire nation understood the grave underlying stakes of this political standoff. The embattled legislative leader walked in first while accompanied closely by 2 prominent legal counselors. He projected the polished assurance of a seasoned attorney who thoroughly understood the persuasive power of shaping a compelling public narrative. He sported a professional dark suit paired with a crimson tie and carried a personal religious text as a prop. He positioned the book on the desk with calculated precision to broadcast a visual message of moral integrity to the viewing public. He settled into the leather seat with the practiced demeanor of a veteran politician ready to deflect incoming hostility. Next, the newly elected official from the Southwest marched into the chamber projecting immense purpose, masked by visible fatigue. She had spent 36 grueling days battling for the fundamental opportunity to execute the duties mandated by her voters. During that period, she possessed the keys to her workspace, but lacked the essential staff and digital access needed to assist her community. The 41-year-old daughter of a revered former congressman sought to continue the legacy established by her late father in the 7th District. She captured the recent electoral contest with a commanding 69% of the ballots cast. This triumph represented a definitive mandate rather than a narrow margin of victory. Nevertheless, her ability to serve remained blocked strictly because one powerful individual refused to authorize her installation. She assumed her place at the witness desk with her hands clasped and her face carefully neutralized to hide her seething frustration. The Progressive Committee members subsequently marched into the room together to demonstrate their unified political stance. Taking her assigned seat at the end of the row was the formidable representative from Texas gripping a dark binder. She completely ignored the man at the witness table while positioning her documents squarely in front of her. The committee chairman cleared his throat and invited the primary witness to present his prepared remarks to the assembled lawmakers. The embattled leader leaned toward the microphone and spoke with a carefully moderated Southern inflection designed to sound approachable yet professional. He expressed gratitude for the opportunity to publicly refute the serious allegations surrounding his management of the swearing-in timeline. He rearranged his printed notes in a deliberate show of relaxed confidence before launching into his defense. He forcefully denied violating any constitutional mandates or engaging in any form of malicious political maneuvering. He insisted his actions simply mirrored the established historical norms for processing officials chosen during irregular electoral cycles. He locked eyes with the broadcast cameras to appeal directly to the American public rather than just the seated committee. He claimed a former Democratic leader had previously established this exact standard by delaying oaths until standard legislative sessions resumed. He stated she consistently refused to process new members during brief pro forma gatherings or scheduled holiday breaks. He firmly declared he was merely applying that precise historical standard to the current situation. The leading opposition member swiftly interjected to inform the speaker that his historical comparison was entirely factually incorrect. The witness sternly demanded to finish his prepared remarks before entertaining any hostile interruptions from the panel. The chairman nodded in agreement and instructed the committee to allow the testimony to proceed without further disruption. The speaker argued that the recent government funding lapse complicated the logistics of a proper ceremonial installation. He asserted his desire to provide the incoming official with the full dignity and traditional grandeur befitting the position. He dramatically paused to let his feigned concern for ceremonial decorum resonate throughout the silent chamber. Furthermore, he expressed deep personal offense at the severe accusations suggesting his delays were motivated by cynical political calculations. He claimed to be outraged by the insinuation that he would intentionally deny representation to over 800,000 citizens. His tone shifted to project intense righteous anger as he defended his personal character and ethical standards. He proclaimed his unwavering dedication to his faith, the nation's founding documents, and the core principles of a representative republic. He fiercely rejected the notion that he would ever compromise his sworn obligations for a fleeting partisan benefit. He leaned back into his chair and promised to administer the oath with full honors once standard sessions recommenced. He concluded his opening statement by reiterating his absolute commitment to following historical procedures in the interim. Low murmurs immediately rippled across the crowded room as partisan divides became visibly apparent among the attendees. The conservative faction nodded along with his defense while the liberal members openly displayed their profound skepticism. The unseated representative maintained a stoic facial expression, even as her knuckles turned white from clenching her fists. The chairman initially called upon sympathetic lawmakers who offered gentle inquiries designed to reinforce the preferred narrative regarding protocol. The witness expertly navigated these friendly questions by consistently repeating his talking points about respecting established traditions. Eventually, the opposition lawmakers received their opportunity to launch aggressive interrogations at the embattled leader. Each sharp inquiry was met with practiced deflections regarding procedural norms and the necessity of proper ceremonial functions. Representative Eric Swalwell challenged the historical narrative by highlighting two conservative members sworn in mere hours after their victories. The speaker dodged the comparison by vaguely citing unspecified emergency constituent needs that necessitated their immediate installation. When pressed for specific details about those alleged emergencies, he conveniently claimed he could not recall the particulars. Representative Dan Goldman angrily questioned why denying hundreds of thousands of citizens their voice was not considered an equal emergency. The witness dismissed the line of questioning as a manufactured partisan narrative and stubbornly retreated to his historical defense. This frustrating cycle of targeted accusations and smooth evasions continued relentlessly for the next 40 minutes. The tension steadily escalated without yielding any meaningful admissions or dramatic shifts in the standoff. The entire trajectory of the hearing shifted the moment the chairman granted 5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas. Jasmine Crockett looked up from her meticulously organized materials after remaining completely silent for the preceding duration. She had patiently declined offers from colleagues to absorb their allotted speaking time because 5 minutes was all she required. She methodically opened her dark binder as the distinct sound of rustling paper captured the room's undivided attention. She acknowledged the chairman with a perfectly calibrated tone resembling a seasoned prosecutor preparing to deliver a lethal closing argument. She bluntly informed the witness that she would bypass standard pleasantries because he had already squandered 36 days of the public's time. When he attempted to interrupt her introduction, she sharply raised her hand to demand his complete silence. She promised him an opportunity to speak only after she presented a devastating timeline constructed entirely from undisputed public records. The chairman considered intervening but ultimately allowed her to proceed after catching a warning glance from the minority leader. She extracted her initial evidentiary document as a massive digital display illuminated behind her to show her staff's visual presentation. She directed the room's attention to the expedited handling of 2 conservative electoral victories in Florida earlier that year. The screen showcased a chronological breakdown that completely demolished the witness's prior claims about procedural delays. The data confirmed the Florida state officials certified those specific election outcomes on the morning of March 1st. By mid-afternoon, the speaker had publicly announced his intention to immediately process their official installations. A brief administrative session was hastily convened, and both politicians took their oaths mere hours after certification. The total turnaround time from the final ballot count to their official seating encompassed a staggering 19 hours. She allowed the sheer magnitude of that 19-hour timeline to resonate heavily in the silent chamber. She pointed out that he utilized the exact same administrative gathering format he just claimed under oath was inappropriate. She offered to read his own recorded actions into the official congressional ledger as a deep flush crept up his neck. He desperately attempted to argue that the circumstances were vastly different before she swiftly cut him off again. She reminded him that his convenient memory loss regarding those alleged differences rendered his defense completely invalid. She advanced to the next visual exhibit detailing the timeline of the Arizona electoral contest from late September. The graphic illustrated the decisive 69% victory and the subsequent official certification occurring 3 weeks later. The presentation ruthlessly documented the 36 grueling days that followed the initial request for a swearing-in ceremony. The timeline emphasized the cruel reality of an assigned office completely devoid of staff, digital infrastructure, or voting capabilities. The visual contrast depicted the smiling conservative lawmakers taking their oaths alongside a photograph of the sidelined representative standing alone. She softly contrasted the 19-hour VIP treatment against the agonizing 36-day blockade for the Arizona victor. She noted both situations involved officially certified, constitutionally eligible candidates succeeding in special electoral contests. She challenged the flustered leader to identify any differentiating factor beyond basic political party affiliation. He squirmed in his seat while attempting to resurrect his thoroughly dismantled defense regarding historical precedent. She immediately interjected to highlight the glaring hypocrisy of him violating his own stated standard regarding administrative sessions. She demanded he clarify his contradictory stances on whether brief administrative gatherings were acceptable venues for such ceremonies. When he vaguely referenced different circumstances again, She relentlessly pressed him to provide specific examples justifying his rapid actions. A heavy silence fell over the room as his legal counselor leaned forward to whisper frantic advice. He waved away the lawyer's intervention and weakly stammered about immediate constituent services needing attention. She instantly challenged him to name a single specific service that warranted breaking his own fiercely defended protocol. He admitted he lacked those details, prompting her to marvel at his convenient inability to recall such supposedly urgent matters. She produced a printed press release from his own office dated the day of the expedited Florida installations. She read his direct quote stating that the citizens of those districts deserved immediate representation despite standard procedures. She stared piercingly at the witness and asked why the Arizona citizens did not deserve that exact same immediate advocacy. She questioned whether he believed only conservative voting blocs were entitled to rapid legislative representation in the nation's capital. The chamber immediately erupted into chaos as liberal members cheered, while conservative lawmakers shouted furious procedural objections. The chairman furiously banged his gavel to restore order just as a coordinated silent protest unfolded in the viewing gallery. 7 members of the Arizona Congressional delegation slowly rose to their feet in a powerful display of regional solidarity. The chairman aggressively ordered the gallery to remain seated, but his demands were swiftly countered by the Texas representative. She calmly informed him that elected officials possessed the right to stand in support of a colleague unfairly denied her seat. The television cameras captured the devastating optics of seated politicians forcing their duly elected peers to stand in silent protest. She pivoted the interrogation toward the explosive true motivations behind the unprecedented administrative delay. The digital display transitioned to highlight a pending legislative resolution designed to mandate transparency for the notorious investigative documents. She noted the legislative maneuver required exactly 218 signatures to force a mandatory floor vote. She asked the visibly tense speaker if he knew the precise number of lawmakers who had already endorsed the petition. When he refused to answer through a clenched jaw, she dramatically revealed the current tally stood at 217. She explained the petition needed just one final endorsement, which the sidelined politician had publicly promised to provide immediately. The room descended into absolute silence as the gravity of her accusation crystallized for the millions watching at home. She outlined how swearing in the new member would instantly trigger an unavoidable national vote regarding those highly sensitive records. She leaned across the dais and sarcastically marveled at the incredible coincidence of his sudden inability to administer a simple oath. His face flushed deep red as he angrily dismissed her factual timeline as a manufactured partisan conspiracy theory. She calmly produced a leaked electronic correspondence sent directly from his chief of staff to conservative leadership operatives. She offered to read the document aloud after he stubbornly refused to discuss internal administrative communications. The message explicitly directed staff to delay the swearing-in ceremony until after the upcoming holiday recess to avoid triggering the vote. The correspondence further noted that the chief executive was extremely concerned about the timing and required a delay to develop alternatives. The hearing room exploded into pandemonium as journalists shouted questions over the furious yelling of divided committee members. The chairman frantically hammered his wooden mallet while the standing Arizona delegation placed their hands over their hearts in mourning. The Texas representative simply sat back and waited for the sheer volume of the undeniable evidence to silence the room. When the sweating chairman finally regained control, the defensive leader leaped to his feet to complain about context. She quietly asked him to explain what alternative context could possibly justify an email explicitly demanding a delay to protect the president. The crushing silence returned as he slowly sank back into his leather chair without offering a coherent explanation. She directly asked why the chief executive was so terrified of releasing investigative files related to a convicted trafficker. He weakly attempted to argue that the president supported transparency through proper administrative channels rather than forced votes. She sharply reminded him that a legislative vote was the literal definition of the proper constitutional channel for such matters. The chairman tried to rescue his ally by accusing the congresswoman of improperly speculating about internal motivations. She held the damning email aloft and noted she was simply reading the exact words written by the speaker's own staff. The embattled leader silently discarded frantic notes passed by his legal team as his defense completely collapsed on live television. Glancing at her watch, the prosecutor from Texas announced her intention to use her remaining 3 minutes for a different purpose. She pivoted the focus away from procedural debates to highlight the devastating human cost of political obstructionism. She directed the committee's attention to an unidentified woman sitting quietly at the end of the witness table. A 54-year-old citizen named Maria Santos slowly stepped forward while tightly gripping a framed photograph. The broadcast cameras immediately zoomed in on the image of a vibrant young woman in her early 20s. The confused chairman attempted to object to the unapproved witness, but the undeniable presence of national media forced his compliance. With trembling hands adjusting the microphone, the grieving mother introduced herself as a resident of the unrepresented 7th District. She steadied her breathing and explained that her 23-year-old daughter suffered from a severe congenital heart defect. Her voice cracked as she recounted how a necessary emergency surgery was cruelly denied by their medical insurance provider. She desperately attempted to contact her local congressional office, only to discover it lacked the authority to intervene without a seated representative. Other regional offices politely declined to assist because she legally resided entirely outside of their designated political jurisdictions. Left completely alone to battle the corporate bureaucracy, the family spent 6 agonizing weeks fighting the initial denial. The provider finally approved the life-saving procedure in late September, but the authorization arrived tragically too late. She held up the photograph and wept as she revealed her beautiful daughter had passed away just 2 days prior to the approval. The young woman died waiting for a powerful advocate to fight the insurance company on her behalf. The entire chamber sat frozen in a heavy, grief-stricken silence broken only by the sound of quiet sobbing from the gallery. Her voice gained undeniable strength as she directly accused the leader of causing senseless deaths by denying citizens their rightful representation. She marched over and slammed the photograph down directly in front of the stunned politician. She demanded to know exactly how many more children had to perish before he authorized the 35-word oath. A fleeting expression of deep shame crossed his face before he offered a hollow apology for her tragic loss. The unseated representative immediately shattered the quiet atmosphere by fiercely ordering him not to weaponize empty apologies. She marched furiously across the room to confront the man physically blocking her from executing her sworn duties. She passionately outlined how possessing her rightful staff and resources could have easily saved the young woman's life through rapid federal intervention. Her voice broke as she condemned him for prioritizing a political petition over the very survival of her vulnerable constituents. She returned to her seat trembling with a mixture of overwhelming grief and uncontrollable rage. A staggering 30 seconds of complete silence enveloped the room as the chairman remained utterly paralyzed at his desk. The Texas lawmaker eventually shattered the stillness by calling her final expert witness to the designated testimony table. She introduced Professor Lawrence Tribe, a legendary constitutional scholar who authored the textbooks used by the embattled speaker himself. The elderly academic confidently approached the microphone without waiting for formal permission from the stunned committee leadership. When asked if the ongoing delay was legal, he unequivocally declared the refusal to seat a certified winner was entirely unconstitutional. He systematically dismantled the procedural defense by noting that internal traditions never supersede the fundamental rights of American voters. He further highlighted the severe hypocrisy of selectively applying historical standards based strictly on partisan affiliation. He leaned toward the cameras and forcefully characterized the obstruction as literal taxation without representation. He boldly labeled the speaker's actions as actual tyranny rather than a mere metaphorical political overreach. The devastating academic assessment left conservative committee members visibly squirming in their leather seats. He concluded his testimony by warning the nation that permitting this behavior would effectively replace democracy with unchecked authoritarianism. With exactly 1 minute remaining, the formidable prosecutor offered the witness one final opportunity to justify his disastrous decisions. She rested her hands on the desk as every camera in the facility locked onto her intense facial expression. She efficiently summarized the devastating contradictions between his rapid conservative installations and his month-long liberal blockade. She reminded him that millions of citizens and federal judges were currently analyzing his impending response. She delivered the defining question of the hearing by asking exactly why the Arizona victor's vote terrified him so completely. An excruciating silence stretched across the broadcast as the leader opened his mouth but failed to produce a single sound. He sweated profusely while his panicked eyes darted between his legal team, the chairman, and the unforgiving camera lenses. He shakily lifted a glass of water to his mouth before hastily returning it to the table untouched. The rhythmic clicking of rapid-fire camera shutters echoed through the chamber like an impending execution. After 18 agonizing seconds, he finally stammered out a weak denial regarding his alleged fear of her legislative influence. She immediately called his bluff by challenging him to administer the oath right then and there on live television. He stubbornly refused, retreating to his thoroughly debunked excuse about waiting for a full legislative session. When pressed to explain what magical transformation would occur between now and then, he had absolutely nothing to say. A solitary voice from the public gallery suddenly shattered the quiet by loudly demanding he swear her in immediately. The isolated demand rapidly escalated into a deafening chant echoing from hundreds of citizens packing the surrounding hallways. The chairman frantically hammered his gavel while screaming empty threats about clearing the chaotic public chamber. In an unprecedented display of defiance, the unseated politician locked eyes with her ally and slowly rose to her feet. Every progressive lawmaker and staffer subsequently stood up and calmly marched out of the room in total unison. They abandoned the conservative members to sit alone alongside a leader completely incapable of defending his indefensible actions. The Texas representative paused at the exit to announce an impending floor resolution designed to force the constitutional issue. The chairman sat paralyzed over a half-empty room that had just broadcast a devastating constitutional crisis to the world. The embattled speaker remained frozen at the table while staring directly at the photograph of the deceased young woman. Within an hour, social media platforms exploded with viral clips highlighting his disastrous 18 seconds of complete silence. His late-night attempt at digital damage control was met with a historically brutal ratio of overwhelming public condemnation. Even his most loyal political allies began publicly demanding he abandon the obstruction and administer the mandated oath. Late that evening, the highest legal officer in Arizona filed an emergency judicial motion demanding immediate federal intervention. The comprehensive legal filing documented the disparate treatment, the leaked emails, and the devastating civilian casualties caused by the delay. A notoriously strict federal magistrate swiftly scheduled an emergency hearing for the following afternoon to address the escalating crisis. She explicitly ordered the legislative leader to appear personally and justify his ongoing refusal to follow constitutional mandates. The conflict officially transformed from a bitter partisan dispute into a profound test of the nation's foundational legal boundaries. Thousands of protesters and academic experts swarmed the courthouse steps as media networks established massive broadcast encampments. The speaker arrived surrounded by a small army of defensive lawyers while the unseated representative walked in accompanied by steadfast allies. The formidable judge took the bench precisely on time with a stoic expression that betrayed absolutely no underlying emotion. She bluntly warned the defense team to abandon their political talking points and focus entirely on constitutional jurisprudence. The lead attorney immediately attempted to argue that the judiciary lacked proper jurisdiction over internal administrative procedures. The magistrate ruthlessly dismantled the jurisdictional defense by citing numerous Supreme Court precedents regarding voting rights and representative governance. She sharply reprimanded the lawyer for attempting to rebrand severe voter disenfranchisement as a simple internal scheduling matter. When the flustered attorney pivoted to the debunked historical precedent argument, the judge instantly eviscerated the obvious logical contradictions. She loudly shut down a subsequent excuse regarding the lack of proper ceremonial dignity due to the government funding lapse. She locked eyes directly with the speaker and demanded he justify his actions under the strict penalty of perjury. He stood and nervously attempted to regurgitate his carefully rehearsed lines regarding the need for urgent constituent services. The judge instantly pointed out his convenient inability to remember those allegedly vital services during the previous day's hearing. He accidentally admitted that the political composition of the chamber heavily influenced his decisions regarding seating newly elected members. She pounced on the fatal error, reminding him that the Supreme Court explicitly forbade excluding qualified members for partisan calculations. She read his own press release back to him, highlighting his profound hypocrisy regarding the universal right to immediate representation. Disregarding his feigned outrage, she swiftly delivered a devastating ruling that completely validated the arguments of the progressive lawmakers. She determined he had unequivocally violated the core constitutional rights of both the official and her hundreds of thousands of voters. She issued an ironclad judicial mandate compelling him to administer the oath within 24 hours or face immediate contempt charges. The courtroom erupted into celebratory chaos as the defense attorneys fruitlessly shouted objections over the deafening noise. Outside the courthouse, the victorious Progressive Alliance reminded reporters that forcing compliance through lawsuits was actually a systemic failure. The following afternoon, a furious legislative leader reluctantly called the chamber into a brief administrative session to execute the order. The newly empowered representative finally took her mandated oath 37 days after her overwhelming electoral victory was officially certified. He immediately stormed out of the room without offering a single word of traditional congratulation or professional courtesy. She marched directly to the administrative desk and added the final required signature to the highly controversial transparency petition. The progressive side of the aisle erupted into thunderous applause as the conservative members braced for the inevitable political fallout. The forced legislative debate regarding the sensitive documents featured fierce arguments balancing victim justice against severe privacy concerns. The transparency measures successfully passed both chambers with overwhelming progressive support and a small handful of conservative defectors. The chief executive reluctantly signed the mandate into law while furiously complaining about fabricated partisan witch hunts on his digital platforms. During her inaugural public forum, the newly seated representative proudly listed the numerous federal interventions her office had already accomplished. She shared an emotional embrace with the grieving mother while promising to pass strict legislation reforming emergency medical insurance procedures. She defended her decision to immediately sign the controversial petition by highlighting the absolute necessity of institutional transparency for democratic survival. She declined to express personal hatred toward the speaker, preferring instead to let the voting public hold him accountable. 2 years later, the state officially established a public holiday to commemorate the ultimate triumph over unprecedented political obstructionism. A prominent documentary detailed the 37-day crisis, focusing heavily on the grieving mother's powerful transformation into a successful legislative advocate. The film concluded with a powerful warning emphasizing that fundamental democratic rights must be fiercely protected against arrogant authoritarian overreach. The final screen text revealed the embattled speaker suffered a devastating primary defeat, while the newly seated representative cruised to re-election. The crucial medical reform bill successfully passed into law, completely transforming the national landscape for emergency health insurance appeals. The Texas prosecutor remained in her current role, explicitly refusing higher office to continue fighting essential battles on the ground floor. The highly anticipated investigative documents triggered massive ongoing legal consequences, forever altering the national conversation regarding elite accountability. The entire ordeal proved that the constitutional system could ultimately withstand unprecedented attacks, but only if courageous citizens relentlessly demanded justice.